Do you ever feel like you're in a movie, lacking control and looking for clues as to what's next? The plot seems to push you along to an inevitable, unknown conclusion. The challenges that surround you are dramatic and explosive, and you are cast as a central character, overcoming obstacles to instill hard life lessons to, hopefully, guide a better future. Well, it feels like all of us have been living in an apocalyptic sci-fi thriller of late. Regular sauna-like heat sears us into feeling like we are living far south of heaven. Ancient forests are bursting into blazing infernos, consuming homes and lives, conflagrations so vast that they create their own weather systems, aptly described most literally as holocausts. Biblically proportioned floods wash away whole communities and cultures in Europe and Asia. Glaciers that have stood frozen witness to hundreds of thousands of years are breaking into bits and melting like snow cones on a southern summer afternoon. Toxic algae taint our waters, vicious storms rock our coastlines, and fertile land dries into arid dust. And for those of us Northwesterners who thought that these perils only afflicted other regions, our recent experiences with rampant wildfires, choking smoke, and blistering heat belie both our lack of air conditioning and our hopes for escape from harm. And as if that weren't enough to break through our apathy and delusion, nature made the point most personally by unleashing a global pandemic that took our lives, triggered our fears, tanked our economy, and tried our resilience. The most recent report from the highly regarded Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change offered a sobering conclusion. Our industry and ignorance have already locked in 30 years of worsening conditions, as we've unalterably raised global temperatures by 2 degrees. On its face, it doesn't sound like much, but the current extremes we've experienced are just a taste of what's to come. As is so often taught, we are like that proverbial frog in the pot, whose response to incremental heating is too slow to save it from being boiled alive. But now, our collective frog seems aware of the roiling waters, but too fatigued or too seeking of excuses to do much more than cook until done. The COVID plague that still plagues us is the direct result of these climate changes. We've intruded too far into nature with our development and driving need to grow and expand. It seems a poetically just consequence for a tiny virus to bring to its knees our advanced civilization that has prided itself on its taming and conquest of nature. Our current moment reminds me of the George Carlin comedy routine from 30 years ago. Sometimes the prophet comes to us with a punchline. In a rant that deflates the arrogance of those who want to save the planet, Carlin counters, quote, "The planet is fine. The people are effed." In other words, what we are really hoping to save is our habitable place, not the planet itself. Carlin continues, quote, "The planet isn't going anywhere. We are. The planet will shake us off like a bad case of the fleas." He even went so far as to imagine the planet's ultimate defense to be a virus. Perhaps only comedy can instill the kind of humility that is required of us to truly meet our challenges. We can only save ourselves, not the earth that far preceded us and will far outlast us. It is beyond the scope of this brief message, and I hope inherent need, to survey chapter and verse of the indisputable facts and virtual unanimity among scientists regarding the dangers we face from climate change. Up until now, it has been relatively easy to write off the tree huggers, vegans, and reconstituted hippies that made up the classic environmental movement. But as the damage wrought by our apathy and delusion is literally coming home to roost and residing in our cells, there seems to be a reawakening to our negligence and our need to chart another path. Please indulge a father's nachas for a moment. My son Ben is, in all humility, reflective of the best and brightest of our young adult generation. His idealism drives a desire to learn and know, an openness to a range of views, a conviction to act and sacrifice out of principle, and a desire to be a force for change and good in the world. Ben often inspires me in my best moments and shames me in my worst. And despite his inherent optimism, he observes what many young adults do about the myriad hurdles that confront us in the world today. Yes, we should fight the injustices of racism and economic inequality. We should care about peace between Israel and Palestine, and we should combat rising authoritarianism. But none of this will matter if the planet is too hot and too wet, as mass migrations from the southern hemisphere inundate our borders, and water becomes the ultimate source of global instability. We, the empowered of this often petty, distracted, and narrow-minded generation, owe it to his generation and his children to act before it is truly too late. In the spirit of this season in this sermon, I was struck by an ingenious commentary on the book of Jonah by Jewish physicist Jeremy England. After the big fish part of the story, England recounts how the people of Nineveh are threatened by destruction from God and only avert Jonah's prophecy through their contrition. Far more than mere words, the people demonstrated through the acts of fasting and the donning of sackcloth and ashes that they truly regretted their wickedness. Even the king, a representative of the entire people, embraces this ultimate expression of tshuva, of considered reflection, conviction to change, and fulfillment of that vow. England emphasizes that this is more than the typical biblical magical thinking that a simple change in attitude shifts divine decree. The Ninevites genuinely appreciate the cause of the threat, their morality and their character, and what must be done to survive. Their immediate response is to restrict their material comfort, to sacrifice luxury for the greater good. The king recognizes God as the source of all and understands God's blessings as precious and vulnerable. And all the Ninevites act, symbolically but significantly, to demonstrate that they will go a different, better way. England continues, quote, "It is certainly reasonable to imagine that the fasting had a practical impact as well. The Lord has mercy on Nineveh, but for all we know, the mechanism of his mercy may well have been the ripple effects of getting the whole city to change its pattern of consumption." He concludes that these tangible changes in behavior are rooted in voluntary individual sacrifice, as well as a powerful concession by leaders that God's way and works command our attention, our loyalty, and our unqualified service. Our tshuva, our true repentance, must be bound to our actions if we hope for better, more blessed outcomes. So, what is our hope and what can we do to meet this perilous moment? The Intergovernmental Committee offers the possibility that, despite what we will now suffer in the coming decades, if humanity can quickly and effectively cut emissions, we could reduce warming for the last half of this century. In essence, we can secure a better place in which our grandchildren might live. Let us hope that the upcoming Global Climate Conference in Glasgow offers an inspiring plan toward true efforts with real impact. But as my son and many others insist, though cutting pollutants, developing renewable energies, and using sustainable resources are helpful and laudable, a far more dramatic transformation is needed. Like the Ninevites, we must embrace a wholesale shift in how we acquire and consume, what we buy and use and toss away, and our broader attitude about our relationship to the earth as visionary caretakers rather than wanton abusers. Our thoughtless, careless materialism was always bad for our characters and souls. We now realize it threatens our very survival on this planet. Our concerns, our commitments, and our actions must be communal and collective. If the past year of pandemics and variants, vaccines injected and rejected, and the need for shared sacrifice to ward off coming disaster has taught us anything, it is that whether we realize it or like it or not, we are interconnected. We are bound to one another intimately, and the choices we make as individuals directly impact those with whom we share this small blue-green orb we call home. Now, I'm not suggesting a kind of monastic self-denial that Judaism resists. God gifted creation for us to enjoy and with which to flourish. But it is an ultimate insult to God's intent and accomplishment to treat it so cavalierly and with such little regard. We must see the blessings of the world as they truly are, finite, precious, and irreplaceable resources. And like the rainbow message to Noah's generation after the cataclysmic flood, God now leaves it solely in our hands as to whether we will live well and live long with what we've been gifted, or perish in the coming waves of our selfishness and short-sightedness. One of the greatest blessings of the Pacific Northwest is the opportunity to hike and experience some of the most breathtaking vistas in the world. Recently, I expanded my repertoire of regional treks near Bend. I had never been to Central Oregon, and I was awestruck by the novel beauty of the high desert and volcanic cragginess. In researching some area hikes, Cindy came across one called the Misery Trail. We are both relatively tutored trekkers, though far from expert. And after reading that the name belied the actual level of challenge, we decided to go for it. At first glance, the scene surprised us with its look of a mini Grand Canyon, deep sandstone cliffs towering over a verdant, lush river valley. It seemed a relatively simple 4-mile loop, and though it was quite warm, the first half, strolling along the river, was pleasant and engaging. But then, the path took a significant turn, straight up. A seemingly endless series of switchbacks ascended a rocky incline as the sun beat down, and we wondered if the path would indeed live up to its name, especially as we spotted the occasional small enclosures along the way containing crutches and stretchers. No spoilers, but we made it. A bit more wrung out, dusty and sun-kissed than expected, with a great sense of accomplishment for having endured. But my greatest takeaway from the journey came as we reached the crest of that foreboding mountain. I looked across into the farms and environs of nearby Bend, amazed at the incredible rock formations that balanced precariously nearby, trying to soak up as much of the magic and mystery of these God-given wonders as I did the oxygen for my heaving lungs. I wouldn't say I had an epiphany per se, but it was one of those moments that touches the transcendent, when I feel both a part of the oneness of all things and overwhelmed by all things, when the strivings of my body, the longings of my soul, and the bounty of my surroundings converge into a feeling of abundant gratitude for what I have and what I share, what I give and what I receive, what is sacred and what must be sustained for all to enjoy. We in the Pacific Northwest, perhaps especially and uniquely, cherish and value the natural blessings we possess, and thus we better appreciate what's at stake and what we can lose. May our loftiest visions extend beyond our immediate needs. Our dreams for our children surpass the limits of the moment, and our acts of repair and reclamation be worthy of the blessings we've secured, blessings we must in turn and in fairness sustain for those who are our immortality. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. And let us say amen.